Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're going to impartially deconstruct the logical framework behind a recent argument on biological essentialism. We'll be breaking down the specific rhetoric and structural analogies used in our source material to define male and female identity. Now, to be clear, we aren't here to take sides. Instead, we're going to pop the hood on this argument to see exactly how the speaker uses concepts of physical reality to build their case. Let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap. We'll break this down into 5 parts: the premise of truth, the bipedal human analogy, the pregnancy exception, the role of medical intervention, and finally, the biological binary conclusion.
Starting off with Part 1, the premise of truth.
Let's treat this source material like an argument map. We're going to slow down a single rapid-fire paragraph to objectively examine its structural pieces. So, the very first pillar of this argument establishes a foundational claim about reality itself. The source roots the entire argument in the philosophical premise that truth matters, and specifically that physical beings possess an underlying fixed nature. The speaker emphasizes that regardless of individual variations or anomalies, there's a fundamental blueprint, a nature, that dictates what a being is supposed to be or do. This concept of a fixed underlying nature, it's literally the bedrock upon which the rest of the speaker's logic is built.
Moving right along to Part 2, the bipedal human analogy. To make this abstract philosophical premise of nature a bit more concrete, the speaker immediately introduces a physical analogy. They start with a baseline assertion that's universally recognized. By their nature, human beings are fundamentally bipedal. We know humans have 2 legs. By starting with something so undeniably observable, the speaker brilliantly anchors the audience in a space of shared agreement before wading into much more complex territory.
And this perfectly sets up the speaker's rhetorical contrast. The argument poses a hypothetical. What if a person is born with 1 leg? Does that mean the number of human legs exists on a limitless spectrum and we could just as easily have 100 legs like a centipede? Well, the speaker argues no, absolutely not. Being born with 1 leg doesn't erase the bipedal nature of humanity. Instead, it indicates an anomaly. It signifies that something went wrong with that standard blueprint, not that the blueprint itself is a spectrum.
That brings us to Part 3, the pregnancy exception.
Now let's see how this builds into the core of the speaker's argument regarding gender and biology. The groundwork of that leg analogy is now directly applied to reproduction. Notice how the speaker draws a direct parallel between a missing limb and female infertility to maintain this premise of fixed natures. The source asserts that just as a human is, by nature, supposed to have 2 legs, a woman is, by her nature, supposed to be able to get pregnant. Therefore, if you meet a 28-year-old woman of childbearing age who cannot get pregnant, the speaker argues you should view this exactly the same way you view a person born with 1 leg, as a specific instance where the natural blueprint has encountered an anomaly.
Next up is Part 4, medical intervention and nature.
The framework then brings in the medical field as a tool to validate this concept of a biological standard. It relies on how we socially and scientifically respond to these anomalies. The speaker outlines a super familiar sequence of events. A young woman who can't get pregnant goes to the doctor, and the doctor runs tests to find out what went wrong. The argument here is that the doctor's very willingness to investigate, to look for a broken mechanism or maybe a hormonal imbalance, inherently proves that pregnancy is the biological expectation for her nature. The logic goes, if it wasn't her nature, there'd be nothing to fix.
The source leans heavily on this specific concept, the exception that proves the rule. The speaker posits that the very fact something is classified medically as wrong, like infertility, structurally proves the existence of an underlying biological rule. The inability to get pregnant doesn't make her any less of a woman in this logical framework. Rather, her status as a medical exception confirms that the standard biological function of a woman's nature is, in fact, the capacity for pregnancy.
Finally, we reach Part 5, the biological binary conclusion.
Here is the conclusion of the speaker's logical deduction. All the previous analogies and definitions are brought together to finalize the boundaries of human identity within this framework. To solidify the argument, the speaker contrasts the woman's medical scenario with a hypothetical medical scenario involving a male. We have the infertile woman seeking medical answers on one side, and on the other, a male who also cannot get pregnant. The crucial point here is how the speaker uses this contrast to map out the absolute limits of their argument. If a male goes to a doctor and says he cannot get pregnant, no doctor on earth is going to run tests to see what went wrong. Why? Because according to the source, nothing went wrong. It's simply his nature. The medical community doesn't treat his inability to get pregnant as an anomaly, they treat it as the definitive baseline of being male. And this leads to the ultimate conclusion of the source excerpt, deducing a strict binary based entirely on those preceding biological and medical analogies. The speaker categorizes all of humanity into two distinct natures: those whose blueprint is designed to get pregnant even if they face medical anomalies, and those whose blueprint dictates they never can. They say, quote, "There's only male and female, those who can get pregnant and those who can't."
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought regarding the mechanics of the rhetoric we just unpacked. Whether you agree or disagree with the source's conclusions, looking closely at exactly how an argument is constructed is absolutely crucial. We've seen how establishing a definition of nature early on dictates every single subsequent leap in logic, moving from legs to medical diagnoses to a definitive biological binary. So here's a question to chew on. How does the way we define nature shape the way we understand human identity? Keep that in mind as you encounter similar arguments out there in the world. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.